So I won't go into as much detail on this last week, but if you remembered last week, we talked about kind of social media being many different things and useful for many different things. I think brand awareness from Twitter's point of view, because Twitter is so public, so we'll talk about kind of how visible everything is that goes on Twitter is to people. Then I think Twitter is a good platform for brand awareness. I think it's a good platform for being able to post things that people are going to be able to see. I think from a customer service point of view, I think certainly we see 7 times as many people turning to Twitter with customer service queries than we do Facebook, despite Facebook being at least 7 times larger than Twitter at the moment. So people do seem to think that Twitter is a good place to go and try and get things sorted out, particularly complaints, which therefore means the reputation management side of Twitter is critical. So once we have a business that's up and running, we need to figure out a way of listening about our business. So we'll talk about that because sometimes it's not about people necessarily tagging you in. I'll talk about what tagging you in is in a second. From a sales point of view, I think this is very much a depends. I think if your audience is on there, it's very good. So we've got a client that does football shirts, and Twitter is the largest driver of converting traffic to their website, which has kind of taken me by surprise, to be honest with you, because I didn't think Twitter would drive that much quality traffic. It's good at driving traffic. So it's good at driving traffic to blogs, it's good at driving traffic to news, because I think lots of people will use it for that purpose. But I've been surprised that it's also good at driving traffic that actually go forward and buy. Why do I think it works for them in particular? I just think that Twitter is where a lot of football fans hang out. So you only have to look at any football team on whatever day they play on these days, but on a Saturday, and it's almost like a collective discussion that's going on that you're kind of weirdly having to yourself, because you're not necessarily talking directly to an individual, you're just kind of spouting how you feel about your team's performance. So I think that that's probably helped them. For others, who knows? I think it will be, again, because of the brand awareness side, I do think it's a good way of getting information out there. For building loyalty and advocacy, probably not so much. I think it's harder to be able to do that. I do think there are things that we might do whereby we look to try and engage maybe with some of our customers who might be on Twitter. So we need to figure out a way of knowing when they post, and therefore it gives us the opportunity to like a post or to reshare a post. Or to comment on a post, and then collaboration. As with most business things, I think it gives you an opportunity, especially with other accounts amplifying your message, so resharing your message and you amplifying other businesses' message. So I think, especially at a local level, I think that there is a strong opportunity for collaboration with local businesses and local organisations. So the customer journey doesn't change, and where we sit within social media doesn't change either, very much in that awareness and interest stage before we get anywhere else. So in terms of kind of your profile, this is your Twitter profile. You get to have a Twitter cover photo, whatever you want to call it. So you get to have a cover photograph. You also get the what we class as the social media icon, dependent on the type of business that you are. So here, compared to last week where we had personal Facebook profiles and Facebook pages, here we just have one account. So there is no difference between a personal Twitter profile and a business Twitter profile, with the exception of you've set it up, and that's it. So with regard with regards to that, I think what you've got to have a think about is this going to be something whereby it is all business facing, or is this something where if it's just you within a business, is there any benefit of it being kind of you almost representing the business? So therefore, kind of gives you a little bit more flexibility, really, over over what's the word? Kind of over what kind of content goes onto your profile at that point. So I'm going to jump on live because I want to have a look at. So where are we? There. So I want to go. I'm going to have to move everybody over there. So I'm just going to have a look for at skills for you. Okay, cool. Okay, so again, we can see the we've got the logo. So I think because the so a couple of things from last week as well, when we were talking about kind of the size of social media logos or social media icons. The skills for you will be a little bit lost because once it's this size, you can't really read what it says. Having said that, I think you've got these 3 people icons, which I think then makes it more of a recognizable logo. So I can kind of, for want of a better word, I can kind of forgive that bit underneath because that's not the thing that you have to focus on. The idea behind the icon really is when you post, if that was to show up in my newsfeed, would I be able to recognize it was you? And in this instance, I would say, yes, I would, because of that top icon and how that top icon works. So that's really good. Then we've got the cover photograph. The cover photograph can change as often or as little as you want that to change. Similar to last week again, where we spoke about whatever the word is, we spoke about kind of putting text on top of images. There is an argument whereby you could kind of list some of the services that you did, or you could even list out some of the stats that you've achieved. So if that was the number of local unemployed people that have been trained and reskilled in the last 12 months, you could kind of put some of those stats on there. Only because if you look at that cover photograph in isolation, it's not obvious what this account does. So therefore, having text on top of images just gives you that little bit more chance to storytell with the image itself. You've got your kind of biography, whatever we want to call it, training and skills development of local unemployed people. Now you have 100, I think you still have 140 characters, so you don't have a huge amount of space to say what's going on. But I would try and use the entire 140 characters to try and tell people as much as I could do. And then as we start to scroll down, we start to see so it doesn't matter whose account this is. If we were looking at an account, we can scroll down and we can start to see the type of posts that they're doing. And we can also see whether they're getting engagement around this post. So if people had replied to this post, you'd see that you'd see a number next to the reply. If people had reshared or retweeted, as it's known on Twitter, this particular post, you would see a number next to that one. And then finally, if people like the post, then we can see 3 people have liked the post. If we click into those, if we click into if we click into the post itself, then we should be able to see the 4 people that have liked that particular post. So again, it's nice and visible for you to be able to go through and see that. So we can kind of use that to our advantage a little bit later on when we start looking at maybe people that do a similar thing to ourselves. Okay.
Can I just ask a question, please, Leon?
Of course you can, yeah.
You know, underneath, just above the photo, if you scroll up, if you go up again to where that man was, the next photo, that one, and it says skills for you, then it says 64 tweets.
Yes.
What does that bit mean? Does that mean that they've retweeted what Skills for You are doing, or does that mean something else?
Okay, so we're at an account level, so we're looking at the account. So this account has tweeted 64 times.
Right. Okay.
So I don't actually, I've never actually seen that on. I don't know if I can see that on mine, because I'd be quite interested to see what mine says if that's the case. Quick look. Oh, there you go. Yeah, so it does 34,100 tweets.
Okay.
So yeah, so essentially, I'm assuming it's a relatively new account, and therefore there's 64 tweets. So kind of gives you an idea as to, I won't say how prolific they are, because the account could be 10 years old, it could be 2 weeks old. So we don't really know that until we start going down. But as we start to scroll down, we start to see the different images that are going on. So again, we'll come on to some of this, but this is more of a almost like a very quick critique of what's going on. So there's no hashtags being used, so we'll talk about hashtags and why we might want to use those a little bit later on. I do like the image. I think the image is pretty good. As we scroll down, we get another one. So we get kind of somebody who has been completed a 6 weeks confidence building course, which is good. Again, we've got a couple of likes, but no other engagement. And again, we don't have any hashtags being used on that one. And then as we scroll down, we see kind of a few others that are going on there. So some good messaging, but not a huge amount of engagement. And I suppose the question is, would you expect to get huge amounts of engagement over something like this? I think because of what you're doing, probably. I think I would hope eventually at some point there'd be you get a lot more kind of people interacting with those posts. In terms of followers and following, so they've got 49 followers. So that's 49 people that have clicked this follow button here, and they are following 147 people. And the great thing about Twitter is you can essentially go and look at anybody's account unless they've locked it down, which kind of defeats the purpose of Twitter. Then I can go and have a look who their followers are. So I can click on that, go through and have a look at those ones. And if I was a rival business, then I would probably start going through and following some of these people who are clearly following this account. And you do that because you're kind of putting 2 and 2 together. If they're following this type of account and you produce a similar type of content, then maybe they are interested in your content as well. So that's kind of one of the ways you might start to look to build the account over time. So yes, as we go down, we can see the posts are reasonably similar. None of them using the hashtags and therefore getting okay engagement. Now, part of the reason they'll be getting the engagement that they're getting is because of the low number of followers. And if I just go back to my home page, so in fact, if I go to my profile page first, then you can see I've got 2,972 followers, but I am following 2,360 people. So what does that actually mean on Twitter? Well, on Twitter, it means that everything that is posted on Twitter is pretty much accessible, definitely isn't acceptable, some of the stuff that goes on here. So it's accessible to everybody unless you lock your account. Now, the only time I would ever consider locking my account on Twitter is if I was using Twitter from a personal point of view and I didn't really want my views to be broadcast to the world. As a business, it makes no sense to have your account locked down as a private account, because that kind of, again, it defeats the purpose of why Twitter exists. So the way that Twitter works is when I join Twitter as an individual, I'm not following anybody, as an individual or a business, so those two things are interchangeable. So when I join Twitter, I'm not necessarily following anybody, so therefore my news feed would in essence be just nothing, because I've got to follow an account in order to see their content coming through. So that's okay when we're following 10 people, because that's essentially whenever those 10 people are putting a message up on Twitter, which we call tweeting, so that's what I refer to it from now on. So whenever those 10 people are tweeting, we would then start to see that content come through our homepage. Now, the downside is when you then start to follow more people, so therefore, bearing in mind I'm following 2,300 people, then suddenly you get an awful lot of content that's coming through. Because if we kind of look through these, that was posted 10 minutes ago, and actually probably the reason it's at the top of my feed is because there's been interaction on it a minute ago. Then we've got a retweet, which has probably happened in the last minute. Then we've got a minute ago. Then we've got 1 minute ago. Then we've got a retweet, a like, so that's probably happened a minute ago. Then we've got a minute ago. Then we've got a retweet. Then we've got an advert, retweet. Then we've got 57 seconds ago. We've got a like. So my point I'm trying to make here is this news feed is very, very noisy. So again, you can see 2 seconds ago, etc. So it's very, very noisy. You'll see this update very often, and therefore, actually, if you imagine that everybody that follows your account is in the same boat, then this becomes very difficult to get your content seen by people if everybody's getting bombarded with this much content coming through.
Can I just ask a question?
You can, yeah, fire away.
It's just about the strategy of following people.
Yeah.
What is the best thing to do? I know you've talked about, following competitors, people that are on competitors' pages, but when you get somebody that starts following you, is it just like good practice or normal to just follow them back, or is there a better way to use Twitter? Because I asked the question because I'm following a lot more people than are following me, so.
So I would, I don't think you necessarily have to follow people back. So there kind of used to be a, what's the word? They're there. Get my teeth in. There almost used to be an etiquette of if somebody followed you, you'd followed them back in the. I think probably in the early days of Twitter. I think people still hope that happens. So I think when you're looking to grow an account, one of the methods around growing an account is to follow people in the hope that they follow you back. These days, you tend to have to follow people, and then often you have to engage with the account. So you have to like some of their posts. You've got to reply to some of their posts to try and kind of get onto their radar. And then some of those people, probably 40-ish% of those people might follow you back. Now, one thing I do think you've got to be a little bit cautious of is if you follow more people than are following you, people can get a bit kind of sniffy at that. They can kind of look at the account and think, oh, you've just gone on a mass following spree, and therefore your followers aren't quite as genuine. I don't necessarily disagree with that. But I kind of understand why people might look at an account and do that. And it's one of the reasons why you see people will have quite close numbers of followers to following. And then what some of those people will do, just to try and look more influential, is they will then mass unfollow a lot of the people that they're following. And then suddenly you're following 10 people and you're being followed by 3,000 people. And people kind of see that as looking more authoritative at that point. So it's a bit of a weird one. It's kind of, I do think you've got to go and follow accounts and hope that they follow you back. I think that's kind of the first place to start with trying to gain followers. I think you probably want to aim for a critical mass. So I probably, in my own head, I'd probably be trying to get to round about maybe 500 or 600 followers as my kind of first take a breather and see how we get on after that. We once looked after a trophy shops Twitter account, and I think we grew their following to about 2,000 followers within about a week. It was a lot of hard work. It was a lot of following and unfollowing, because there is a limit on how many people you're allowed to follow without getting followers back. But we followed loads of golf clubs and football clubs and everything else that we thought would be relevant. But that was about a week's worth of work to try and do that, and to try and have that audience. So should you follow everybody back who follows you? Probably not. If there is a relevance, so if it's a local person, I would definitely follow them back. If it was a local business, I would definitely follow them back. If it was some random person from New York, I probably wouldn't follow them back. And the point of that is, I don't want their content coming into my newsfeed, because I'm going to make an assumption that they're not going to be posting anything that I'm going to be bothered about kind of reading. Hopefully that makes sense. Have you got a follow-up question to that, or does that answer your question?
No, that's fine. Thank you. Yeah, that's good. Cheers.
Okay, cool. All right. So one of the issues that we've got is, if we follow too many people, then we end up with a news feed that almost becomes not fit for purpose, because then trying to find relevant content becomes really, really difficult, because ultimately it's reasonably pop luck what I then see coming into this news feed, other than the fact that I've chosen to follow those people. But beyond that, it's whether they're posting something that I'm going to be interested in. So there's a couple of things. One is this little kind of icon at the top. Twitter will try. So there's if you click on that, I'll show you what you can do. So with regards to kind of the control over your news feed, you can have it set, and the default is kind of see the latest tweets as they happen, but it will be tailored to accounts that you appear to engage with on a more regular basis. So rather than it being absolutely chronological order, it's going to be accounts that are the latest accounts showing up. However, we are going to show you stuff from people that we think you are more interested in doing that one. If I go into the settings, there's a few different settings I can have with regards to kind of my feed. So one of the things I can do with my feed is I can essentially make it absolutely chronological. Wouldn't recommend that you do that. I think that the content that we've got on there, I think that's a pretty good kind of compromise at that point. So you can see, so at the moment, I've got top tweets first, but if I wanted to see everything in chronological order, I could click that button and that would change it into chronological order. And that probably doesn't engage me as much, because then it is pretty random as to what's coming through. So that's kind of how the news feed works. So the way, going back to kind of when we first joined Twitter, everything is out there ready for us to find, but we have to do something in order to be able to see that content. So for example, if I go to Twitter and do a search for Cumbria and just hit return, then this will show me all of the top tweets where the word Cumbria has been mentioned in those tweets. So as I scroll down, we can see it's an advert. So again, so people haven't used hashtags in order to do this. And on Twitter, although we are going to talk about hashtags and we are going to say hashtags are very, very important, it's not absolutely vital in the same way when we're looking at Instagram in a week or 2 weeks time, whenever it is, where you've got to use hashtags on Instagram, otherwise you are pretty much invisible to everybody else. So on Twitter is good. If you're somebody who does a search, it's good at finding the word in that particular search. And it then breaks this out. So the search function, top, latest, people. So we'll come back to that in a second. Photos and videos. So if I swap this to latest, we had May the 2nd at the top. Now we've got 19 seconds ago, JCP in Cumbria. So they've posted something on there. And then as we scroll down, we've got Club Cumbria. So that's because the word Cumbria is in the name rather than in the tweet itself. Then we get an advert. Then we get Connolly Limited. We've got Cumbria mentioned there. And then we've got the Ambleside account, Cumbria mentioned there. And so on and so forth. So what we've done, so even if we just joined Twitter and we weren't following anybody, the minute we do a search, our newsfeed is then full of content that matches the search term that you've just put into that account. So for me, one of the quickest ways to grow a business account is to grow it on a local level. So I would do a search for Cumbria. I would probably change that to people rather than content, and then I would start to work my way through some of the relevant Cumbria, obviously bigger accounts, so things like BBC Cumbria and Radio Cumbria and other bits and pieces. So some of these accounts are not going to follow us back. So we've just got to accept that I'm going to get content that's going to be local content, but I'm not going to get everybody following us back. But as we start to scroll down, we may start to see smaller accounts that maybe would follow us back at that point. And the point here is, if we go back to the biography that we were talking about before, when anybody does a search and you show up in a search under people, they get to see your logo, they get to see your name, and they get to see your biography. So if your biography doesn't convince me at this point that you're worth following, then I'm probably not going to follow. So if I'm looking to follow accounts, I'm probably not going to click through to every single account to see what you do. I'm just going to have a quick look, have a quick read, and think, is that worth following? So is the thing that you are potentially going to be talking about worth following for me? And I will make my mind up fairly quickly from those biographies. So the biography is really important because it's what physically shows up in search. If you were to leave a comment somewhere and somebody hovered over your name, it's going to do the same thing. It's going to bring up that kind of post. So weirdly, your cover photograph isn't as important here, because the only time I see your cover photograph is when I physically go and visit your page. But your biography and your social media logo or icon, whatever we want to call it, is absolutely critical at that point. So this Cumbria Life mag, in terms of the logo that they're using, it's just a mess. It's just a mess of nothingness. I can't really see what it is, and that's because what they've tried to do is they've tried to use, I'm assuming, the cover photo. It's also talking about Christmas, so kind of feels like it's a little bit out of date. Now, if I scroll down, it looks like, yeah, I mean, it looks like they've got a pinned tweet from November. They've got a post from December that they've retweeted, and then they've got a post of their own from December. So chances are, maybe, yes, it's a monthly. It looks like it's a monthly publication. So they, for some reason, it looks like they last tweeted in December, which I don't know about you, but if I see an account that hasn't tweeted for since December, the first question I ask in my head is, are they still in business? Are they still kind of publishing magazines and doing the other stuff? So if we do a Twitter account, we've just got to bear in mind that if somebody looks at our account and we haven't posted content for months on end, it's probably not a great look for our account at that point. So if I wanted to follow these accounts, just going back, all I have to do is click on the follow tab. That means that I'm now following that account. They will get a notification through at their end, and they will then make a decision as to whether they follow my account or whether they don't. So if I look at Cumbria Life, if I just hover over before I hit the follow, they've got 13,000 followers, but they're only, inverted commas, following 1,400 people. So the chances of them following me back are probably remote. However, I'm curious to know who they're following, because I'm suspecting they're going to be following Cumbria-based businesses and Cumbria-based accounts. And if I scroll through, I pretty much get a feel that that would make sense, because if their magazine is Cumbria Life, surely it makes sense for them to have followed all of these different accounts that are related to Cumbria at that point. So maybe I would get a follow if I was a Cumbrian business at that point. So that could be by location. We could also do by topic. So if we did, what could we do then? So if we did cakes, just hit return. Again, bit of a weird one, because this is, and again, bear in mind, this won't be location led. This will be absolutely about. This will be about kind of. I know Charm City Cakes are based in somewhere in America, because I used to watch it on television. But you can see lots and lots of different ones. So it doesn't become as useful simply because this isn't people that are local to you. This is just literally anybody with cakes in their name or in their biography. Now I can filter, so if I click on this and click on advanced search, then what I could do is I could put cakes, and then I could try. So that's gone. There used to be a location when I thought it disappeared ages ago. It has done. So I'd try cakes, and then what I could do is let's try that as a. So that's kind of doing two things at once. So that I think should give me. So we've done a search for cakes, and then we've also kind of included Cumbria in there as well. So we've got cakes and Cumbria. We've got cakes and Cumbria. We've got Cumbria, and I can't see cakes on that one. We've got cakes and Cumbria, and so on. So you can kind of search together, and that might give you something that's more relevant at that point. And again, if you were trying to target people that were cake makers in Cumbria, this would be a really quick and easy way of then going through and starting to follow those accounts, looking to engage with those accounts, and hoping that those accounts then start to follow your account back at that point. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're just giving me a tip, because I'm thinking,
Yeah.
why haven't I come up? And it's because I don't have Cumbria in my
Yeah.
in my bio, so I'm going to put that in straight away. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those where, because I think that they've almost kind of retired the they've kind of retired the location filter in terms of used to be able to filter by that as well. Then I think it's more important than ever to include it in your profile for it to show up at that point. There are, I mean, it does say over here, like, people that you follow, locations anywhere or near you, but it, again, near you isn't going to show me anything because I'm based in Lincoln, so it's going to be like, I've got no idea why you're trying to do that. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else with the advanced one. You can kind of do exact, so when you say all of these words, then that means that they could be sporadically throughout somebody's profile. If you say this exact phrase, then it has got to be that exact phrase or nothing. If you say, so what's the difference between all of these words? Oh, okay, so, oh yeah, so all of these words meaning what's and happening, that's right, has got to be within the biography somewhere. Any of these words is where you can search for multiple words. So, as it said there, if you do a search for cats or dogs, then it would find you stuff that had cats, or it would find you stuff that had dogs, or it would find you stuff that had cats and dogs. none of these words. So the only time I would do that is if you'd done a search and let's say the results were just not what you were hoping for. You could come in and do essentially a negative word. So you could turn around and say something like, so if I'll just show you. So if I did, let's say we did cakes, but then we put in Cumbria, just to show you something different, and we hit search. What you'll see at the top is you've got cakes, you've got a space, and then you've got this this dash or negative sign, Cumbria. So essentially, you've said to Twitter, show me all of the accounts that have got cake, but make sure you don't include any that say Cumbria. So when you would do that is if you've done a search and the search just seemed to be full of stuff that you weren't looking for, and you could see, let's say, so what I tend to do, I'll show you what I do. So I usually search for my name. So one of the ways that I look out for potentially people mentioning my account or tweeting about my account is to put in Zaddle. You can see it says including search results for Saddle, which I don't want it to do. So what I could now do is I could put in negative and Saddle, hit return, and that gets rid of that top one that was there before. And then as we start to scroll down, I'm more likely to see content that relates to me. And some of this is my own content. Some of this will be people mentioning my content, but this means that this is an easy way for me to be able to work my way through and find whether I've been mentioned. So this is another example. So I don't know what this Zaddle account is. It's clearly Russian, and I think it's Russian, and it keeps getting mentioned. So again, what I could do now is I could put another negative in and put hopefully Zaddle and see if that gets rid of that, which it does. And now I've tidied up that search result. So actually all I'm seeing is kind of me tweeting, because that's what I've essentially asked it to do at that point. So the search function for me is probably one of the most powerful parts of Twitter. And I think Twitter as a platform is an amazing platform to listen and to listen out for, possibly to listen out for opportunities, but more often just to listen out for local stuff, listen out for industry related stuff, that kind of thing. Now, the other thing that I would use it for is similar to what we've done here. So this for me is kind of my reputation management on Twitter, because somebody might mention my account, but they might not tag me. So if they don't use @Zaddle Marketing, I'm not going to get notified that they've mentioned my account. Therefore, I've got to listen out for people mentioning my business name, but accidentally kind of forgetting to tag me in. So let me just see if I can find you an example of that. Okay, so they've done that one. So this is not the best example in the world, simply because they have tagged them in. But this is a company where they couldn't get Ruddux as the Twitter handle, because it had already gone. So they had to kind of make something up. So they went with help me Ruddux, and what that means then is if you didn't know that, and most people don't know that, then what's going to happen is someone's going to, if you imagine this creative pool jobs hadn't tagged them and just said, hi there Ruddux, we want some help getting this job filled, and then whatever they did, then they wouldn't have seen that. They wouldn't have been notified about it unless people use their Twitter handle. And because not everybody knows their Twitter handle, they won't always see the stuff that comes through. Now, sometimes that could be somebody giving them lots of good feedback. Sometimes it could be people kind of having a whinge that something hasn't happened on time, at which point then, yeah, so you're looking at, so they've also got a shop in Lincoln, so, or they used to have a shop in Lincoln, they haven't got a shop anymore. So you could see kind of somebody having a moan about kind of business parks, saying Ruddocks has gone. That would have given them an opportunity to join in potentially on that conversation, but nobody had tagged them into that one properly, and so on and so forth. So so again, we've got another one. This is probably the better example. So our new department logo, designed by one of our Year 8 students, created into a digital image by the amazing team at Ruddocks in Lincoln, but not tagged in. So in theory, if they're not listening out for their name in a different way, i.e. setting up a search and saving that search, then they might not even see that post. I'm going to go into the post because I'm curious to see whether they did see it or whether they didn't. And if I go into the likes, I can see Councillor Biff Bear has liked it. And if I go into the retweets, then I can see that one has retweeted it. So actually, nobody at Ruddocks has engaged with this post. And when you think that this is so this is a school that is giving you positive feedback, how would you feel if you're Katie, who has posted something onto Twitter? Doesn't matter whether she knows how to tag somebody or whether she doesn't, she publicly mentions how good the amazing team at Ruddocks has been, and there is silence from that particular business. I would feel I'd been ignored, and therefore what was a good positive interaction with the business possibly turns into a slightly negative one, because I'd be sat there going, right, well, I won't post anything nice about you again. And you could argue it's not their fault because she didn't tag them in, but it is, why is it her fault that she's got to understand how to do that, when actually all they really need to do is have a search on Twitter that they can essentially save, search for Ruddocks in Lincoln, click on latest, and this could be a weekly thing that they went into, and they could check and see how many people are mentioning their details. And you can see there's quite a few where they've been mentioned and there's been no interaction from the business because people haven't tagged them in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So for when you've got your business up and running, Sonia, for Eloise with the charity work, Elaine with your work as well, do kind of have a look for people that might mention your business, and it might not happen very often, but it's about kind of making sure that if it does, you're there to catch that. So I would have something like a diary note for once a week. It literally takes you a second to grab the search, do the search, have a quick look. And if you see a post from last week that is at the top, you know there's been nothing since then that's showing up at that point. So it's just a really easy way to look after your reputation. That's where I would class that as reputation management. It's not always about people complaining. Sometimes it's about people giving you great feedback. So they could have retweeted this, they could have reshared this to their kind of their audience, saying we've had some great feedback from one of our head teachers where we did this particular logo for them based off of whatever it was. So they could actually have told that in a more an easier story format. So that's how we go and find people to follow. In terms of how do we then start to make sense of things, so just a couple of bits around navigation before we have a look at one of the main ways that I use Twitter. So if I click on notifications, so these notifications are split down into all notifications. So this is a mixture of people that have mentioned me, people that have followed my account, any accounts that I've got set up as wanting to get notified about. So there's quite a few accounts like these accounts here where I've got the notifications set on their accounts. So what that means is if I go through to, let's say I go through to this one here, this little bell icon. So that is where I've essentially said to Twitter, I want to prioritize tweets from this account, and I want these to be accessible in my notifications. And that means that when I come to Twitter, the first place that I go is notifications. I'll always have this here. So this is essentially my kind of top list, for want of a better word. So I can click in here, and now I'm only seeing content from the accounts that I have prioritized at that point. And if I want to take those out, I just go to those accounts. So again, I could go to that account. I could click on that button. I don't stop following that account, so I'm still following, but I'm less likely to see their content because I've not prioritized it in my list at that point. So hopefully that makes sense. And then the final thing that I would do, and I think this is where if you want to get value out of Twitter beyond just kind of tweeting, we've got these lists, and these lists are, they can be publicly viewable or they can be private. And the idea behind these lists is I can create a list about anything. So I can literally name the list whatever I want it to be. And then I can add people to this particular list. So let me just show you how I might do that. So I'm going to create a list of Cumbria Twitter accounts. I'm going to make it private just because I don't want it showing up. I could give it a description. Now, if this was private, I might be putting down competitors. I might be putting down customers. So again, you can have a think about that one. I could give it an image if I want to give it an image. I can't be bothered on this one. And then I click on next. And then it says search people. So for now, I'm going to leave that. I'm just going to click on done. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our search. I'm going to put in Cumbria. I'm going to go to people tab. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to add these people to a list. So I'm going to click through to their account. You can see the follow tab. So I'm not going to follow this account. I'm going to hit the 3 dots. I'm going to click on add or remove to a list. And I'm going to add them to my Cumbria Twitter account list. Now I could add them to more lists. You can see all of the lists that are listed here. Once I've done that, I need to click on save. I'm going to go back to Cumbria. I'm now going to go to Cumbria Police, click on their account. Again, I'm not going to follow, so they're not going to get any notification that I'm listening to them because I've put them into a private list. So if it was a public list, they would get a notification saying that they've been added to a public list. And I'll just do one more. So let's go for that one. Click on 3 dots. Click on add or remove from list. Add to Cumbria list and hit save. So what that means is if I now go into my lists and I go through to my Cumbria list, essentially now I've filtered Twitter. So bear in mind again what we talked about, that every time you're looking at this news feed, you're looking at it through some kind of filter. So if this is your normal news feed, the filter is these are all the people that you're following. If you've done a search, then this feed becomes everything that matches that search. And now we've gone to lists. We're essentially saying everybody that's added to this list, these are the tweets that these people are making. And you can see that actually the most up-to-date tweet in this list is 21 minutes ago from this particular account. And as we scroll down, we see an hour ago, we see an hour ago, we see an hour ago, we see an hour ago. Obviously, they post on the hour. We see Cumbria Police an hour ago, we see 2 hours ago. So essentially, 21 minutes ago in my news feed, based on how many people I am following, doesn't really exist. I'd never be able to scroll down through enough tweets to find something from 21 minutes ago. So the easiest way to make sense of Twitter is to create lists, and is to create lists based on what are you going to Twitter for. So probably the 7 lists that I would always recommend that you create. List number 1 would be Cumbrian businesses, and that would be a public list. So I want Cumbrian businesses to know I've added them to a list. They'll get notified about that. That may encourage them to follow my account. List number 2 would be my customers, but that would be a private list, so nobody but me gets access to that. Why would I do that? Because then I can click on that list, see what my customers are tweeting about, and that might be from 3 days ago or 4 days ago, but it gives me the opportunity to engage with their tweets. It gives me the opportunity to like them. It gives me the opportunity to comment on them. It gives me the opportunity to reshare their content when it feels applicable. And that means that if my account has got different content going onto it, it won't be obvious that they are my customers at that point. List number 3 would be local news accounts. So things like what you've just seen me setting up there. There's the police, there's a local newspaper, and then there was a local tourist thing. So that gives me potential content that I could reshare through my account, because I'm like, if I'm a Cumbrian business, or a Cumbrian charity, I'm likely to have people following me because of the locality. So if I share content that's useful, like I don't know any of your roads, the A66 is shut, then I can share that information just more as a public service announcement than this is about cakes. So this is about, again, using social for what it was built for, which is the social media side of it, the social interaction side of it, not just pushing out content that's just always about us. Then I would have a list, I'd have an industry list. So depends on the industry that you're in, but for the charity, I might add a load of other charities that do similar work or complementary work to what we do. So I'd add those to a list. So again, it gives me something that I can interact with really quickly. I can see what's going on. I'd have a competitors list. So I'd have a private competitors list. Click of a button, I can see what are they talking about, what kind of engagement are they getting, if they're getting good engagement on posts, why are they getting good engagement on posts. And then the last one, or the last 2, I suppose, would be possibly things like journalists. So if I went to Twitter and did a search for journalist, and I also put in Cumbria, then chances are, when I click on people, I'll start to see all of the journalists that are covering news in Cumbria, and this gives me some great people to try and engage with who might be interested in some of the stories that we do. So particularly for things like the charity, this could be quite a good list of people to then start to kind of look to engage with over time, and possibly if they start to follow your account, possibly reach out at some point as well. So you can see people giving out their email addresses. Why? Because they're a journalist and they want people to be able to get in touch with them should they have a news story. So really quick and easy way of doing that one. Other things that you could do with that as well. So if we talked about sort of industry journalists, then you could do the same thing. Put in journalist, you could put in podcaster, whatever you wanted to do at that point. So for me, out of everything that we've talked about, lists are probably the most useful way of using Twitter to listen specifically to something that you're interested in. And you could be interested in it from a competitor point of view, from a local point of view, from an ideas point of view, from a customer point of view, or just an industry topic point of view as well.
So Liam, can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course you can, yeah.
So instead of actually following, because I said to you at the start that I tend just to follow, but I'm not commenting or anything.
Yeah.
I could unfollow, but then put them in, create a list to put them in, so I could see what they're doing. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So you don't have to, so you can follow people and add them to a list, so that it's not kind of one or the other. So it's just that what I was showing there is it's possible to listen to people without publicly following them. But I have some lists where I'm following those accounts, but I've also put them into a specific list because that specific list is about a specific topic. So one of mine was analytics. So I follow lots of industry people, but I've got a bunch of people that they really only ever talk about things like Google Analytics, and that gives me an opportunity to be able to click on that particular button and say, right, what's kind of going on in the Google Analytics world at the moment, and they would essentially be able to do that.
Right. Okay. So because I'm just thinking that, you know, because I'm probably, I mean, I think I'm about 100 people that I'm following.
Yeah.
Nobody's following me because I haven't put anything out there.
Yeah.
But that might just be a way of me trying to manage the traffic, because sometimes it's quite overwhelming. So if I'm just thinking, if I unfollow the ones that I don't necessarily want to have all that information all of the time. But then I can set up these lists, so I can still see what they're doing, but I'm just not necessarily following them.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, to be honest, even though I follow 2,000 and odd people, the reality is I don't ever go into any of, apart from that notification tab where I've got kind of specific people highlighted, I very, very rarely go to my newsfeed. If I'm going to go to Twitter, I go to one of my lists that I've created, and I go to Twitter kind of with a purpose rather than just to randomly see what people are talking about.
Right. Okay.
And that's a far easier way to do it. It keeps your sanity because you're not just overwhelmed with loads and loads and loads of content.
Okay, that's lovely.
All right.
Thank you.
So the final thing, so I'm conscious it's 11 o'clock, and Twitter's one of these. It kind of. So the last thing I just want to touch on, because I think we need to sort of understand it, is just physically tweeting. So this is when you're putting a message onto Twitter. You have 240 characters, and then once you go above 240 characters, the ability to send that out as a message disappears. So you can see we've got -6. We've got this red kind of highlighter here saying you're 6 characters over the 280 character limit it is now. And I can't tweet, can't press a button. You can hear me pressing, but I'm trying to press. I can't do that. So therefore, I would have to delete those. And then once I delete that, you'll see that that tweet comes back up. So I'd now be able to send that out. So one of the things that people like about Twitter is the fact that you are kind of restricted to 280 characters, which means you do kind of have to get to your point reasonably quickly. Having said that, I could write something, I could add an animation. So I'm just going to put a GIF on there for now. So I could put like "good job" like that, and then we've got that animated. That tells a nice story. And then what I could do if I wanted, so rather than write everything here, I've got the ability to create what's called a Twitter thread. So if I click on add, that will actually add a second tweet to this particular one. So let's just put a few words in there. I could add another image, another animated GIF. I could add a poll to this one, and then I could add the plus button and add another one. And this is how people have started to use Twitter, where they want to tell a story, but they don't want to send people off Twitter to a blog to read it. So they'll actually break it down into like bite-sized chunks. and I've read some of the greatest stories on Twitter where people have used this threaded tweet facility to be able to do that. So I really like that as a kind of as a tool to be able to use. So that is, let me just go back to tweeting. So we can type stuff out, we can add photos or videos, we can add animated GIFs or GIFs, however you want to pronounce it. We can add a poll where we can try and get kind of some kind of engagement, so gives people the chance to be able to vote on up to 4 choices, I think. Is it 4 or 5? It's 4. Yeah, 4 choices on there. And then we can add emojis, as you would expect to be able to do. And then the final thing, which is where I would go with this, is you've now got this scheduling tool within Twitter itself. So I could write everything out, but then I could say, I want this to go out on the, I want this to go out tomorrow at 11:06 British Summer Time. Click on confirm. And this is how you start to, this is how you should be thinking about creating content on Twitter, because again, we talked about sort of scheduling a little bit last week. If we don't schedule content on social media as a business, our content does this. And what's happening is we're really busy, so we're not posting anything onto social media. We're really quiet, so suddenly we're up here, we're really busy, and we go down there. So you want consistency. The easiest way to get consistency is to schedule your content in. This doesn't stop you randomly tweeting some stuff out when something happens and you need to talk about it now. But what it does do is it gives you a level of consistency to your tweets. Now, one of the questions we get is how often should we be tweeting? And really, it's almost impossible to answer because it depends on what you're trying to get from this. If you're trying to get lots and lots and lots of traffic going to a blog, then you're probably tweeting 30 times a day. Why? Because of the way the news feed works. The minute you tweet, you're already a minute old in a minute's time. Your tweet is an hour old in an hour's time. And if other people have tweeted since you, in the news feeds of the people that are following your account, chances are they'll never even get to see your content. And the only way then to get your content seen is to keep tweeting more often. So if that's one of your strategies, you've got to do scheduling, otherwise you'll find it impossible to be able to do that. The other thing I mentioned is hashtags. So a hashtag is just literally the hash symbol. Doesn't have to be a real word. It literally changes whatever you have typed into a hashtag. So if we were to put cakes, now if we were to put space Cumbria, you can see that it's only the cakes side of that that's been included in the hashtag. So if I wanted that to include Cumbria, I'd have to put it either together, or I could use an underscore and do it that way. Okay. The reason that you do hashtags is not only do they show up differently in your tweets, so they are kind of, if you look, so that's kind of blue versus the rest of my tweet being black. I don't know why I said that, anyway, it doesn't matter. So if I go off and do a search now for hashtag Cumbria this time, and we go to latest, then what this is now going to do is it's going to show me the posts where hashtag has been used. So you can see hashtag Ambleside, hashtag Cumbria, and then they've used a few more hashtags, hashtag Lake District, etc. So 2 things. 1, it means that it shows up in a hashtag search, and number 2, when anybody uses a hashtag within a tweet, it actually becomes searchable. So you can see as I hover over these words, they're kind of becoming underlined, sorry. And if I click on Lake District hashtag, all that I've done is I've changed the search at the top to be Lake District. And again, I can go through and see a different hashtag. So Love Park Run, hashtag Lake District. So the more hashtags that you use, the more feeds, in theory, you could show up in. So you can see this one has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hashtags, which actually, the way to interpret that is they've given their tweet 9 opportunities to be found in a hashtag search that somebody may have just come to Twitter, seen animal GIFs somewhere else, clicked on the hashtag, and now they can see all of the messages, all the tweets that have used hashtag animal GIFs at that point.
Is there a maximum number of hashtags that we should use?
There's not a maximum. Well, I suppose you've got to find that balance between it looking spammy and it doing its job. So if I use Instagram as the example of one that does have a limit, so on Instagram you have a limit of 30 hashtags, so you physically can't do any more than 30. So I think that you ought to be looking at probably in the region of about 15 hashtags when you're posting. So bear in mind, even just for Cumbria itself, there's Cumbria, there's Lake District, there's Ambleside, there's probably a couple of other Cumbria ones. If you're at a local level, so if you're in Kendal, you might have hashtag Kendal. If you're in a local town, you might have hashtag the local town as well. So suddenly a location hashtag may end up being 5 individual hashtags, and that's just purely from the location. You've then got probably industry or topic hashtags, and then you might use something else as well. So there's no ownership on hashtags. If you make a hashtag up, but then somebody else starts to use it, you can't stop them from using it. Therefore, you'll often see very popular kind of topics. So this Gaming Unleashed is a promoted hashtag by EE, but if we click into this one, chances are, once we go to the latest, so that's theirs, but I bet if I go into latest, it'll be full of bots, because, oh, actually that one's not too bad. Yeah, so some of them are all right, actually, but then you start to scroll down, you can see it starts to be rubbish content at that point. So, so there's no ownership over hashtags. Anybody can use a hashtag. I've seen people use branded hashtags. So I've seen people do hashtag Google. Nothing to do with Google, but they've probably got some Google News that they want people to be able to discover. So they'll use the hashtag to try and show up in a hashtag search like that. So we've covered our profile. We've covered following and kind of that angle. We've covered lists, which I think are probably the most underused and yet most important part of Twitter. We've shown you how to do searches, and we've shown you how to potentially compose put a tweet together with a mixture of images, hashtags, videos, etc.